Good morning, folks. We'll begin the service in just a couple minutes, so I'd ask you to find your place and to please turn off or silence your cell phones. Thank you. We'll start in just a couple minutes. If you can, please stand for the beginning. Or zarua latzadik uleishrelev simcha. 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 Please be seated. Mizmor LeDavid, a psalm of David. Adonai, do we ever deserve to enter your sanctuary? Can we ever merit a place in your presence? When we live with integrity and do what is right and speak the truth without deceit, if we have no slander on our tongue and do no evil to others nor mistreat our neighbor, when we spurn what is contemptible but honor those who revere you, never retracting a promise once made, lending nothing for unfair return, accepting no bribes against the innocent. Make these deeds your own, and you shall stand firm forever. My friends, my name is Hillel Nori. I'm the interim rabbi here at Bethel this year. That means that I'm serving them between their last rabbi and their incoming rabbi. And so I'm here this year, and I'm glad to host you and to welcome you to our synagogue this morning for this difficult but important occasion. I am probably one of the few people here who never knew Saul Kimerling, so I'm going to leave the description of his life and his legacy here in Birmingham to others to speak today. But I do want to speak as the rabbi of the synagogue here about what I see as the broader impact of his loss for our community. If you go out to the Midwest and you go to places where they grow trees for paper, when they harvest the trees out of the field, they leave a few trees. The biggest and strongest trees are not harvested, and they're left through the following planting and the following harvest. They call those trees grandfather trees. And while you might think that you would want to harvest the biggest, largest tree to yield the most wood, it turns out that if you leave them, the forest grows better. The other trees are aware of the presence of the grandfather trees. And their presence allows the next generation to grow more vibrant. We are the trees. And today we mourn the loss of one of the grandfather trees. A person whose influence reached well beyond their own circle and their own years, and whose contributions to this community especially are felt by me and others in future generations. Those roots grow really, really deep here. And so the loss of that grandparent, of that generational influence on our community, is even more poignant. I hope that that loss will be mitigated and comforted by the stories we tell, the memories we share, and the lasting legacy that you'll begin to hear about today. May that be God's will for us, and we can all say amen. I want to invite and turn over the remainder of the ceremony this morning to Rabbi Mark Soloway.
Feels like a real honor to be here. I had the profound privilege of being Sol's rabbi for the last 3 and a bit years in Boulder, Colorado. And just grateful that I was able to make the journey here. I've stood at this bima before when I was here as a guest, and I stayed with Sol and spent some time with him, as you'll hear in a minute, and spoke from this bima in a very different context. Hu haya omer, Rabbi Hillel said, Im ein ani li mi li, uksh'ani la'atzmi ma'ani, v'im lo achshav eimatai. Rabbi Hillel said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? This very famous teaching of Rabbi Hillel from Pirkei Avot was on Sol's lips in the last week of his life. When I visited him shortly before his last Shabbat in this world, and we sang a little together as he sat in a chair with that infectious signature smile that filled the whole room, as he spoke of studying as a child every Shabbat afternoon with his Zaidi, Michael, right here in Birmingham. I asked Saul if he had a favorite Shabbat song, and he started singing, V'im lo achshav eimasai, v'im lo achshav eimasai, v'im lo achshav eimasai, eimasai, which was the last part, although I heard this morning from Leslie that he was actually singing the whole of it. I just heard him sing that. If not now, when? Im lo achshav eimasai, eimatai. If not now, when? And Leslie said that he sang it again at Shabbat dinner that night, and again the following Shabbat afternoon. There are, of course, so many ways to interpret this teaching. It's a profound and slightly enigmatic teaching, but how apt it is for Sol Kimerling, who may or may not have been aware that he was dying, but he was so deeply in the achshav, in the now, living in the present moment, radiating love and gratitude and humility and wonder. Sol was for himself in the sense that he knew deeply who he was, with such a strong identity as a Jew, as a mensch, a scholar, a storyteller, as a deeply devoted husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, uncle, friend, deeply ethical businessman, a philanthropist, and yet he was never, never, never just for himself, with his deep generosity and compassion and humility. And he knew the power of now, of being present and grateful for what was right here. Butch told me that in the 3 or 4 years that Sol has lived with him and Leslie in Boulder, not a single day went by when he didn't thank us, Butch said. Not a single day went by when he didn't thank Leslie and Butch for his life in Boulder. Sol's bedroom overlooked the foothills of the Rockies, and he loved those views of the mountains, the sky, the clouds, and his last years were precious and happy with Leslie and Butch taking such tender care of him. And I actually just found out a few moments ago that when Sol first arrived in Boulder, he said he wanted to be a full member of Bonei Shalom, which is my synagogue, even though he was offered the opportunity to be an associate member because, of course, he remained a member here. And that says so much about him. And we were so blessed that before COVID, Sol would come regularly to Shabbat services. And he was always, of course, beaming and connecting to everyone, especially the children. He also used to come to my Talmud class for a while on Wednesday lunchtime, and he always had such profound questions and observations and comments and, of course, stories. So Sol embodied that teaching of Hillel, of Rabbi Hillel, not this Rabbi Hillel, the other Rabbi Hillel, standing up for himself and for others with an awareness of the urgency of the moment. Im lo achshav eim asai, im lo achshav eim asai, eim asai. And there's a beautiful video of Sol singing that on that Friday night, the last Shabbat. So how do we tell the story of this man who was himself a master storyteller? Anyone who's had the privilege and honor of knowing Sol Kimerling has been enchanted by his stories and by the quality of his life and his relationships. He was born here in Birmingham on December 12, 1930, to Max Kimerling and Tilly Alterman Kimerling, and was such a deep, deep part, as we heard, deep roots in this congregation in Bethel and in the wider community. And he was known and adored for his scholarship, his commitment to Judaism, which he inherited from his Zaidi, his impressive and deeply ethical business accomplishments, building the Alabama Oxygen Company into a successful public company. And he was named, as many of us know, in 1976, the Small Business Person of the Year for the state of Alabama. He was committed from the beginning to equality as an employer. And he used to proudly tell the story of the customer who refused to take a delivery from one of Sol's black drivers and reps. And he ended their contract and told his employee to come home. Later on, he taught courses at UAB in ethical business, drawing on some of the research and activism of his daughter, Judith. And I feel that there's something very poetic about the fact that Sol died on the same day that the first black woman was confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. Judith said that Sol and Rita together always made us feel that we should give back to the community and to causes that were important. Together, this power couple instilled in a quiet way such deep and lasting values to their family. As Carla said, Zaide had a penchant for good trouble. Sol co-authored a 12-part series on the history of Birmingham during the civil rights era for the World newspaper called No More Bull. And I'm sure some of you have read some of those incredible articles. And I feel so profoundly grateful, as I alluded to earlier, that in 2018, shortly before Sol moved out of Birmingham, I got to do a mini civil rights tour with him, staying the night in the legendary Lexley Drive home that had been such a hub of hospitality for decades, and being offered copious amounts of strong black coffee and chocolate, which were two of Sol's greatest joys. But as I drank that coffee and tried to resist the candy, what I really was impacted by, of course, was hearing Sol tell his incredible stories. More than anything else, Sol felt that the best thing he did was marry Rita Kapuya, the formidable Sephardi Jew from Montgomery. They met at UAB in 1950 and they were married for almost 60 years. Although this was sort of considered a mixed marriage, Sephardi and Ashkenazi, Birmingham, Montgomery. Sol adored and admired Rita, and they were equals in every way. Sol stood up for her, and she stood up for him, and she brought out the best in him. Among other causes, they together supported Jews who had escaped the former Soviet Union. They founded a Jewish Catholic dialogue group. They highly valued education with their support of Red Mountain, an alternative school. And after Rita's leukemia diagnosis, they were very involved with the UAB Cancer Center. Rita served on the board. Sol had served as president of the Birmingham Jewish Federation, and after Rita's death in 2010, he established the Rita C. Kimerling Public History Endowment to provide support for programming in UAB's history department. Until the very end, Sol would always speak with such deep love of Rita, describing her as his better half. Leslie remembers that at Yom Kippur services, as they sat next together during the Al-Chetz, the confessional prayers, Sol would say, "God can forgive me, but I'm never forgiving God for taking Rita away too soon." And now the family is comforted to think of Sol and Rita back together again. And in some bizarre way, today feels almost like a wedding. Leslie had said that at Rita's funeral, there were verses from Shir HaShirim, from the Song of Songs, that were read out. And as we imagine Sol and Rita back together, Ani ledodi v'dodi li, I am for my beloved is for me, together in that divine embrace. Sol and Rita raised 4 incredible children, Elise, Michael, Judith, and Leslie, all so different and all doing such wonderful things in the world. And they all adored, like we all did, their parents, with such happy memories of road trips, ski trips, Jewish holidays, seders, other festive meals where so many were welcomed to the table in that iconic home. As well as a thinker and a scholar, Sol was also an athlete, an all-state football player, and he skied until he was 82 years old. And Sol's grandchildren, Eric and Carla and Valerie, even though they grew up 3,000 miles away from Birmingham, they always felt that Loxley Drive was still home, filled with sweet memories of their grandparents' love and playfulness. And there are many, many Solly stories, some of which we're going to hear really soon. Sol always connected with everyone and formed such special and lasting relationships, genuinely caring about people, whether they were family or friends or employees. And we all know you just couldn't help but fall in love with Sol. He loved children, and they loved him back. Carla remembers in this sanctuary the Shabbos mornings when Sol would hand out little chocolates to all of the children, all of the kids in shul. And as well as Sol's biological great-grandchildren, Landon and William, through Butch, Sol got some extra great-grandchildren in Boulder who had such a special relationship with Sol, calling him Zizi, Zeta, Zizi, and they adored being with him, and he adored being with them. Sol's short-term memory was very poor towards the end. but his long-term memory remained, and as Butch said, he chose only to remember the good and the positive. Occasionally he would ask Leslie, "Did we ever have any issues with anybody?" Every day he would ask, "Is everyone in the family okay? Does anyone need anything? Are the grandchildren okay? Are they happy?" He wanted to know that everyone he loved had the happiness that he had. And this happiness was not superficial, but it was at Sol's core, and it was accompanied by some very deep thought. He lived and he died as a thinker. His final physical pose as he left this world was in a position of thought, as if he was contemplating what was next on his journey. On Friday night, yes, this Friday night, Jews throughout the world are going to be sitting at their Passover Seders, telling the stories of liberation. And there will be a large empty chair at the Seder table. But Sol's presence will be, I am so sure, at many Seder tables this year. Sol filled notebooks with his Pesach thoughts for the Seders that he had led through the decades. And perhaps like Eliyahu, like Elijah, Sol will visit us and bring this messed up world closer to redemption. The heart of the Seder is the matzah, of course, which represents humility and simplicity, unlike the chametz, whose puffiness represents the ego. Sol was so much more like that humble matzah. He didn't have much Pesach cleaning to do. When I visited him for the last time, last Shabbat afternoon, he was mostly resting, peacefully and comfortably. But when he opened his eyes, he immediately woke up with that inimitable smile, acknowledging everybody who was there in the room. And after a little while, he looked at me and he said, "Rabbi, what do you think is the state of the Jewish people right now, and what do we need to be doing?" Unbelievable.
Simple question.
He never had simple questions. He cared so deeply until his very last breaths for his family, for Judaism, and for the Jewish people, and for the whole world, knowing who he was, but never, ever just for himself. V'im lo achshav ein masai, if not now, when? So may Sol's soul be at peace, reunited with Rita, and may his precious memory always be a source of blessing and inspiration to all of us whose lives have been impacted by the generous, generous spirit of Solomon Kimerling. Hamakom Yenachem, strength and comfort to all of the mourners, to Elise and Gary, Judith, Michael and Anne, Leslie and Butch, Eric and Gloriana, Carla and Joseph, Valerie and Cody, and great-grandchildren Landon and William, Avital, Erez, Oren and Julian, and Sol's sister Paula, nieces, nephews, cousins, friends. Hamakom Yenachem. May we all receive strength, and may we all receive comfort. Amen. At this point, if you are able to and it's comfortable for you, I invite you to rise. And before we hear some words from Saul's family, I'm going to chant Psalm 121, which says, "I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come?" And every day of the last 3.5 years, Saul would literally open his eyes in his bedroom in Boulder, Colorado, and see the mountains. And they gave him a lot of strength, a lot of joy, a lot of comfort. So Saul, this is for you, lifting up your eyes, lifting up our eyes to the mountains. Shilam alo tesana el harim mayin yavo ezri עזרי מעם אדוני עושה שמיים וארץ. אל ייתן למות רגליך על ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל. אדוני שומרך, אדוני צילך על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יכך וירח בלילה. אדוני ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. I lift my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard your life. Adonai guards your going and your coming now and forever. Amen. Feel free to sit down. And at this point, it's my honor to invite Sol's wonderful grandchildren, Eric, Carla, and Valerie, to come up.
Bring the mic down a little bit.
Hi, everybody. Of the many lessons we learned from our Zeta, 4 stick out that we want to talk about today. So first, when telling a story, accurate facts are optional. When we were growing up, Zeta would put us to bed with what we later coined Solly stories. There's a whole book with illustrations that we created at some point as well. He loved telling stories and reveled in the opportunity to tell them, share anything with a new audience. Any new audience was a great opportunity to try out the material again. Whether it was talking to squirrels to get him to the pool, or hunting for a witch at summer camp. Z's #1 goal was to make us go to bed with a smile, excited for whatever Solly would get up to next, whatever adventure he might find the following day. Second, there's no such thing as coffee that is too strong or a wrong time for chocolate. Chocolate peanut butter cups, chocolate ice cream, or just plain old chocolate, Z didn't discriminate. He always carried a piece of chocolate in his pocket, and during our annual ski trips with Z and Beb, and as you heard today, he did ski until he was 82, Z always had a candy bar in his jacket that he would take out on the ski lift to give us all a little something to help us get down the last few runs of the day. Third, he offered us, I think, probably my most important life lesson to live by. This too shall pass. When we turned 18, Z carried on this tradition that had begun, I think, when his generation went off to war. He gifted us each with a ring with an engraving, Gam ze yavor, this too shall pass. I think a reminder really to relish the good times as they're happening, because they will pass. And to remember that even the toughest moments won't always feel so difficult either. I think it's really a life lesson to live by. It surely seems like the way Solly practiced his life every day. Fourth, and most importantly, love hard and love fiercely. Z loved life, but his love for his life was rooted in his love for his family and, most importantly, for our Bubby. He never ended a telephone call, a FaceTime, which always began with a close-up of his ear, or a visit without talking about Bub, telling us how much he loved us, how proud he was, or as he used to put it, how terrific we are.
Huh? Okay. You guys good?
Do that after. No. Oh, okay. Sorry. We'll really miss his smile, his laugh, his stories, and his hugs. And as much as we miss him, we smile knowing that he will be at all of the coming milestones in our lives, exactly where he is supposed to be, sitting next to our bub. Give her a kiss for us. We love you, Z.
All right, well said, guys. Thank you guys all for being here, and definitely true about the FaceTime directly to the ear for the last couple years, 100% of the time. So just took a gentle reminder. But anyway, when it comes to Zeta, I don't really have the words to do justice to the man who he was, but a few things do come to mind. I think the best term is, we've been saying repeatedly today, is Renaissance man. He really set the bar extremely high. He was a pillar of his community, a historian, a man of faith, an athlete, an intellectual, an amateur comedian, among many, many other things. To me, of course, he was really just an awesome grandfather, but I think equally importantly, he's somebody who I looked at as a great friend. If I can pass on to my own kids even half of who Zeta was as a person, I'll consider myself to have been a very successful dad. Zeta, you and Bubby always like to tell me and my sisters how proud you were of us. Sometimes we might have even gotten tired of hearing of it, might have gotten a little annoying to hear it so much, but this time it's my turn to say it. I'm so deeply proud of the complete life you lived. Thank you for setting a shining example for us all to follow.
And I think during the course of Shiva, we might get to hear some of the Soli stories, which I know some of us are looking forward to. At this point, we invite Sol's son, Michael, from Paris.
So as everyone said and will say, Dad believed in stories. And he truly was a master storyteller and a joker, just as importantly. During one Zoom call, and every Sunday night we were lucky to have Zoom calls during COVID, just before his 90th birthday, I said to him, so Dad, what are you planning on your 90th birthday? And on the video where I could see his face with an instant, huge grin and smile, he said, I'm planning the next one. Well, he did have a next birthday. Something else about Dad is he always wanted someone to write a family history book. He asked each child to write these books, but the most he got instead was mostly European history for one of the kids. So anyway, he didn't always get everything he wanted, but he was persistent. So for today, I've tried to write something about him, make a little story. I call it an ode to SPK. It goes like this. He soared up and down fields and protected on playgrounds. He roared in debates and wrote in defense. He met his beloved, forever committed, and forever humbled by her wits. Their growth was to unity. He grew a business, but never an empire builder. He built respect. And in the name of dignity, he greeted diversity before its time. He grew a family, and in the bosom of community, he counseled many along a path, their own path. He prided always in his hometown, even when there was a reason to doubt. He loved people. His life was bright, reflecting on many. His humor was infectious, more than language can transmit. He left us all better off than we were before. He was present until the end. As age sought him, he did not flee it. Always gracious, he faced his fate with spirit and determination. Even embraced new horizons, the easel. He loved to paint. As time passed, and although his memory shortened, his shadow lengthened. We now honor his being, this human being he was. He is already wholly missed, yet he is whole once again. His soul somewhere in the space with his beloved.
So I don't really have words to describe my father. So I want to share a story about Dad and our family in Temple Bethel. When I was a teenager, we took a family trip. Mom and Dad took the family to Israel. And on the way home, we stopped at the Vatican. And we went to the Vatican, and they had a display of religious artifacts, and there was a Torah in a case, and it was open. So my sister Elise looked at it, and she said, "Oh, so this is what the inside of a Torah looks like." Well, my father was appalled. She had been bat mitzvahed, I'd been bat mitzvahed, we'd never seen the inside of a Torah. So when we got back to Birmingham, we always came to Temple for the holidays, and when we came for Simchat Torah, which is the holiday, as y'all probably know, most of you celebrating getting the Torah, and the men would carry it around, take all the Torahs out of the ark, carry them around and sing and pass them from one to the other. Well, my father passed the Torah to my mother, and that was scandalous because women weren't supposed to touch the Torah. Now, change takes time, doesn't happen overnight. And for years, my father refused to carry the Torah on Simchat Torah because my mother could not also carry the Torah. Now, women can read the Torah. No doubt, a lot of other people contributed to making that change here in this congregation. But I'd like to think that my father, together with my mother, opened a door so that now women who want to know what the Torah looks like in this synagogue don't have to go to the Vatican to see it. It makes me very proud. So I just want to share that story.
Oh, what a legacy. It's in so many different ways, such a legacy. So finally, going to invite Leslie and Butch to come up here and share some memories of Zizi.
Well, thank you. I only knew Saul in some of his last years through Leslie, but he was amazing. Saul was a man who inspired many, including me. Living with us in Boulder, he truly became my second father. Saul and my dad were so different and so alike. He also became the Zizi, the Zeta Zeta, to our grandchildren. And that was a place my father never got to be, but Saul stood in so wonderfully. There's so much that Saul did and so many stories. We'll share a few of them at the Shiva, not now. But I will focus on one sparkling facet of Saul, his fundamental belief in the equality of humans and diversity. Like so many things in Saul's life, this started with his Zeta. There's a few stories there too about this. When Saul was asked later about segregation in business, people just assumed everything in Alabama, segregation, the 50s, the 60s, what was going on. He said, running Alabama Oxygen, about half of the population around us were black. If I didn't hire any blacks, I gave up half of the good people. That was just his fundamentals. This theme carried on into his retirement and his love of studying history and the involvement of the Jewish people in the civil rights movement that he wrote about and went on to be the series in the Weld, No More Bull. Saul, we love you and will miss you. You will live on in the memory of the many you loved and inspired. Goodbye.
Okay. Well, Dad, it's a beautiful day outside. Since your passing, we have received many notes from so many who knew and loved you. Here are some of the words used when speaking of you. Encouraging, wise, master storyteller, important in our lives, hands down a favorite, smart, serious, quick wit, big smiles, generous eyes, high expectations of his children, learned, mentor, tzaddik, influencer, great heart and soul, respected, lovely sense of humor, warm, kind, thoughtful, full of laughter, loving. Our home in Boulder is known for a nice wine selection. When Dad came to live with us, we offered him wine one night at dinner, and from then on, wine with dinner was a Saul staple. He would raise his glass at the start of every meal. L'chaim, to us he would say, with a big smile. A few bites into dinner, he would raise his glass again and say, thank you, what a lucky guy I am. Every evening for almost 4 years. Dad joined Butch and I in Boulder to recover from health issues, but his heart was here in Birmingham. Within a few months, he realized he was staying long term. Nevertheless, whenever people asked him where he lived, he always said Birmingham. He loved this town, this community, the life he lived here. His childhood in the house on Overhill Road, Shabbats at his Zeta Michael's home, antics with his cousins. He loved building his world with Mom as leaders of this community and raising his children amongst family and heritage. Still, he embraced life in Boulder, and he adopted our town as his. And Boulder, too, came to love Saul, as all of you here do in Birmingham. Dad and Mom were a team when it came to raising us, and quite the team they were, each instilling in us values and ways of being that we embody each day. Dad was my business role model and lifelong advisor. When asked at a panel recently who had influenced me most in my business career, it was Dad who came top of mind. He was my best tennis partner. The game of racquetball that he taught me my senior year of high school led me to find the game of squash in college, a game that has taught me so many things over the years. But it was in these last years as housemates in Boulder that I learned perhaps the most important life lessons. One Shabbat, when we were at the house of our children, Becca and Jeff Gunlevy, we participated in their household tradition of asking, what was your rose of the week and what was your thorn? We all shared one highlight and one annoyance or sad event. When it was Dad's turn to share his rose, he just looked at the 3 great-grandchildren across the table and pointed their way with that solid grin that we all know and love. For the thorn of the week, he thought about it for a moment, and then he shook his head and said, none. Every day at breakfast, Dad would look at the mountains and the sky from our kitchen window and say, how beautiful. Every evening when we went to bed, he would say, another good day. It didn't matter if it was snowing, raining, or windy, it was always a beautiful day. Though he missed Mom terribly, he continued to see all the good in life. His family was his pride and joy. As Rabbi Mark already mentioned, always asking, is everyone okay? Does anyone need anything? Is everyone happy? Dad started painting in Boulder. His canvases were always filled with color. He loved painting the landscapes around our home and of the Colorado mountains, sky, and especially the clouds. In his paintings, you can see his warmth, optimism, and love of life. Painting a desert waterfall was his last activity before going to the hospital. Complete, content, happy, loved, with a crooked smile and a full heart. That is how Solly left us here. Now he is with his beloved Rita, home together again. Dad, please give Mom a big hug and kiss from all of us here. Love you.
As we hear these stories, I keep thinking of another teaching in Pirkei Avot that asks 4 questions, not the same 4 questions that we're going to be asking on Friday night, but the 4 questions: who is wise, who is strong, who is honored, who is rich. Got the order slightly wrong. Who is wise, who is rich, who is strong, and who is honored? And the answer comes, Ezehu Hacham, who is wise, Halomed Mikol Adam, the one who learns from everybody. Saul always had something to learn from everybody. Ezehu Ashir, who is rich, Hasamech Bechelko, the one who is happy with what they have. We've heard so many stories that testify to the fact that Saul was so deeply happy with what he had, wherever he was living in the moment. Ezehu Gibor, who is strong, who is mighty like a warrior. Hakovesh Yitzro, the one who is able to control their passions. And I think that's part of his ability to always put other people before himself. And finally, who is honored is the one who honors everybody else. Saul was wise, Saul was rich, Saul was strong, and Saul was deeply honored. So we're going to conclude our service here with the El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer, which we'll do again at graveside. And then after that, we're going to please ask everybody who's not in the immediate circle of mourners to remain seated as we take Saul out of this sanctuary that he loved so deeply and that for generations had been such a deep part of his life. So Saul, for the last time, we're going to take you out of this space, this special space to you. And we ask that everyone, you can rise, but we ask you to remain here while the family and Saul leave this sanctuary. And now, if it's easy and comfortable for you, I invite you to rise for the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'malot Kedoshim U'Toharim Kezohar Akiyah Mazhirim et nishmat Shlomo Pinchas ben Mordechai Lev v'Tamara shehalach la'olamo v'gan Eden tehei menuchato Ana Ba'al harachamim hasirehu b'seita kanafecha le'olamim utzaro b'tzoro hachaim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Solomon Kimerling, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.